Barbarella, Queen of the Universe movie review. So, this movie is a cult classic, which, according to the definition of a cult classic, means it's famous, but it's not famous, if you follow me. I mean, the fact that it came out all the way back in 1968, so the fact that we're still talking about it now indicates that it's got some degree of staying power and that it's famous to some degree, and yet it is kind of obscure. Most people have never heard of it, most normal people, I think. I first heard about it, I don't know how old I was, about 10 or 12 or something like that. Time magazine at some point published a retrospective on 1968, which had just everything, you know, the history, the politics, the entertainment, and my parents had it around the house. I was flipping through it as a kid, and yeah, there was a picture of Barbarella. It looked interesting. If you're not familiar with this movie, the concept is, it came out in 1968. It's starring Jane Fonda, and it's kind of like a science fiction, kind of Flash Gordon type stuff, mixed with like a comic book aesthetic. At least that's what it's supposed to be. I'm gonna get around to critiquing the flaws of the movie later. But it looked really cool to me, and I was a huge comic book nerd, a huge science fiction nerd. I used to watch kind of these old science fiction movies from the 1950s, which when I was a kid were rerun on Saturday afternoons on American Movie Classics cable channel. Big fan of bad science fiction. This, in addition to just appealing to the science fiction nerd in me, I was interested in this movie because, you know, as I kind of found out more about history and politics, I think this movie had some sort of cultural significance because this was the movie that made Jane Fonda into a sex symbol. I mean, she had been an actress before, but this movie had kind of full-on exploited is the word I want to use. It's gone to emphasize her sexy angle. So after this, she really became a sex symbol of the 60s, which I believe, somebody correct me if I'm wrong, I believe this is why it was so controversial that Jane Fonda became an anti-war activist. I mean, if it had been anybody else, it wouldn't have been that big of a deal, but because it was, you know, she was kind of the sex symbol of that generation, to kind of go to North Vietnam and kind of appear to lend comforts to the enemy side, felt like a betrayal to a lot of the soldiers who had idolized her as a sex symbol. Yeah, somebody let me know if I'm making too big of a jump there. But I think the fact that this movie turned her into a sex symbol directly kind of fed into the anger that she became an anti-war activist. Although, yeah, arguably there would have been some anger regardless, because she did kind of go to Hanoi and was kind of fraternizing with the enemy. Anyways, that's kind of the background to this movie. I had known all that, but I'd never gotten a chance to watch this movie because, you know, it's somewhat obscure, isn't it? You don't see it in your video stores. Until one day when I did see it in my video store. I was living in Japan, and then I was walking through the DVD store, rental store, and there was this movie on the shelves. And I thought, I've always wanted to see this, you know, just out of curiosity, if nothing else. Yeah, pardon me, I'm filming this right in the morning out of necessity. It's the only time the house is quiet. My voice is still waking up, so I'm sipping coffee here. Right. Yeah, so rented it, and fun fact, I was just talking about the cultural impact of this movie. There was something I didn't even know until I started watching the movie. Turns out the bad guy in this movie is a mad scientist named Duran Duran, which is, yeah, you guessed it, where the 1980s music group gets their name from. I guess they were fans of this movie. If you go to Wikipedia, they've got like a whole list of the cultural impact of this movie. I mean, it's not mainstream famous nowadays, but it's had an impact on kind of people who are fans of this cult movie. I regret to say that I hated it. Sorry, I'm going to give this movie a bad review. I mentioned I love science fiction. I love bad science fiction. You know, those B movies from the 50s. Bring them on. But the problem with this movie, though, is it's not just a bad science fiction movie. It's a bad science fiction movie, and it's like a sexy movie, and it's a bad psychedelic movie. So, I'll start with the sexiness first. Much of the supposed draw of this film is just based on Jane Fonda's body and the revealing clothes that she wears. It's interesting. I think, the filmmakers of the time were obviously trying to get away with as much as they could. So Jane Fonda is shown in numerous tight-fitting or revealing outfits, and there are even a few scenes where she's completely naked. Now, during these scenes, the camera is carefully positioned. So, you know, you're not seeing anything you shouldn't really. They're just doing all these clever camera angles, and she's moving her arms to cover certain things and stuff like that. Still, it is kind of amazing they got away with this in 1968. But in this day and age of MTV, you know, it's nothing the kids haven't seen on music videos or MTV a million times. Also, speaking of stuff that the kids haven't seen a million times, in this day and age of the internet, access to depictions of the female form, or photographs or videos or whatever, have never been more readily available. Which kind of, makes it a little bit, it seems a little bit silly to kind of sit through this whole bad psychedelic movie just to see some glimpses of Jane Fonda naked. But I think maybe that was more of a draw back in 1968. I mean, like, I know they had Playboy around back then and stuff like that. But, you know, like, maybe it was a little bit harder to get to. You know, you had to go to the drugstore or get one of your, you know, friend's older brothers to buy it for you. Or I don't know, I'm hypothesizing because I never lived through 1968. But that's my guess, is that before the internet, this kind of stuff was out there, but maybe the access to it was a bit more restricted. And so if you had a movie where you had kind of a naked woman walking around, maybe that was more of a draw for young men of the period than it is now. Even though, again, the camera is carefully positioned so you don't get to see anything. The psychedelic elements of the films. I love bad science fiction, but I hate psychedelic films. And I say this as somebody who's kind of vaguely interested in the culture of the 60s. But whenever all the psychedelic films that I've sat through, which ones have I sat through? Magical Mystery Tour, Psychedelic Elements, and Easy Rider. You know, like those trippy scenes and stuff like that. I just have no patience for them. I think these scenes are designed mainly for people who are getting high or whatever while they're watching it. Not that I would ever advocate any sort of drug use. Or they're designed to just kind of be on the background where there's a party. You know, there's like a swinging 60s party and the music is on and everyone is dancing. And this is just kind of on, you know, displayed on the wall on the background or something like that. You can get away with that, but when I watched this movie, I actually, maybe this is my own fault, I rented it during the afternoon. So I'm sitting there and I've got like some donuts and Coca-Cola and ready to be entertained. And then just this weird, trippy, psychedelic stuff. I'm not a fan. The special effects are pretty awful. And I know this is 1968, but I think even by the standards of the time, yeah. I think the writers of the movie were going for kind of an Alice in Wonderland type story, where Barbarella or Jane Fonda is going through this adventure and encountering all sorts of strange things. But I think what they did is they just kind of substituted strange and random stuff instead of interesting or imaginative stuff. So she meets all this random stuff and random creatures on her journey, but just none of it is at all interesting. So, yeah, I wasn't a fan. I didn't see much in this 90 minutes that I thought made it worth viewing as a film. As a historical curiosity, though, yeah, maybe. I mean, like I was mentioning at the top of this review, this film does have some sort of cultural impact. So yeah, maybe. Maybe worth viewing as a historical curiosity, but consider yourself warned ahead of time.